Hello, greetings, all you wild women. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Wild Woman's Renaissance. I am so blessed, honored, and excited for this interview, this conversation that we're going to be having today around a topic that is actually probably the most important thing to me in my life. And it's the topic of Mary Magdalene and her relationship with Yeshua. You may also know him as Jesus Christ. And today our beautiful featured speaker is Lauri Lumby, and she is doing so much good in the world. She's a modern day Magdalene priestess. She's a spiritual counselor. She's authored the book Song of the Beloved, which is the gospel according to Mary Magdalene. She's also, she has this whole concept called authentic freedom, which I also want to get into. And today we're going to be talking specifically about the Magdalene priesthood and the emerging church. And I think this is extremely profound to be talking about during this time. And if I just want to say before we even, dive in and before I even introduce her, if you have any type of resistance or like feeling some kind of interesting energy in your body around the concept of talking about, these things that are perceived by many people as religious, like Jesus or Mary Magdalene or Mother Mary, please stay tuned, because this could be very healing for any religious wounding around being a female or feeling any type of shame that you may have experienced in your life. So if you're one of those people and you're like, oh God, I can't even hear the word Jesus, please stay tuned, because this is going to be something for you. So thank you. So Lauri, thank you so much for being here. I am just deeply honored. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please tell us about a little bit about yourself and what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, well, thank you, Shelley. I'm so honored to be here and be part of this exploration of the wild woman. And I'm just grateful for the gifts that you're bringing into the world, and serving as a vessel, as a channel for women's healing, women's empowerment, women's journey of self-actualization. And ultimately those are my passions, specifically the self-actualization piece. And that's really the focus, the foundation of all of the work that I'm doing. And I'm just grateful for all of the paths that I've taken to get to this place. And so today, one of the things we'll be talking about is the Magdalene priestess, the Magdalene priestess training, the Magdalene priesthood, whatever word you want to give to that, and really talking about reclaiming women's authentic roles as wisdom resources, as spiritual leaders, as medicine women, as teachers, as guides, as leaders in our world. And, the Magdalene, I believe, is really coming forth right now in this generation because it's time. It's time that the seeds that were planted 2,000 years ago begin to bear fruit. It's time that the power that was taken away from humanity 5,000 years ago is restored into our hands, that we can reclaim the divinity that is our natural inheritance and fully embody that divinity as human beings. And I truly believe that this is what we're called to do. This is why we're here in this human experience. And I'm grateful for the teachers that have gone before us, including Mary Magdalene and Jesus, that have echoed this, that have said, you're here to be fully human, you're here to be fully divine, and we're going to help you remember how to do that.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's so true. This concept of being fully human and being fully divine. And that's what that whole message was all about. Like,
yeah,
we can embody divinity in human form. It's not separate.
Yes.
It just takes some opening and receiving of that love. It's really, that's really powerful. Well, Mary Magdalene is, we talked a little bit, before hitting record on this, and she's definitely my mentor, my friend, my sister, my teacher, And I always have felt I am a disciple, to
Mm-hmm.
things. And so I almost feel like I'm a disciple of, yes, Yeshua, but really this union, this co-ministry. I like the way that you say that she was his co-minister.
Yeah.
That they carried that sacred union, and just the role of all the women, in Jesus's life. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
that. Who were these women, and what is the significance of Mary Magdalene? Who was she? And what can we learn about her that could empower us during these times?
Yeah, it's Magdalene's story is so interesting because there's the story,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the way the story's been interpreted.
Mm.
And the way the story has been interpreted is ultimately one of the primary sources of, I'm going to say, prejudice against women, the damage that's been done to women, in the name of institutional religion. And I don't want to demonize institutional religion, because I think there's absolutely a place for that in our world, and I would love to see the expression of that come into a deeper state of wholeness.
Mm.
But, Mary's role was really countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
And, at the time that Jesus was walking this plane, women were really considered as less than they were property. And their value was held in very low regard, except for their role as birthers, birthing sons, preferably, and housekeepers and housemakers, and fulfilling the task of womanhood, but without any legal rights, without the right to own property, without the right to make decision, without the right to serve in the temple, and without the right to even touch men in public, to express emotion or feeling except with their husbands or sons. Women were not to go unaccompanied out into the world. And if they did, then they were shunned or accused as being, a prostitute, a whore, whatever word they might have used at that time. And Jesus said, no, women are equal to men. Women are as deserved of men to lead, to teach, to learn. And Mary Magdalene fulfilled that role. Mm-hmm. Scripture tells us that she was healed of 7 demons, which has been twisted to say that she was somehow a sinful woman. Mm-hmm. And I love Jean-Yves Leloux's interpretation of that. And I think that this is pretty common among modern day scripture scholars, to say that healing of 7 demons was not about sinfulness. It was not about mental illness. It wasn't about demonic possession. It was about Mary being supported and guided through a process that allowed her to become fully self-actualized. A process that allowed her to identify what her gifts were, what her call in the world was, and then empowering to live out that call. And she then was empowered to do that for others. And that's the part of the story that's really missing for us. We see glimpses of it in the Gnostic Gospel of Mary. And we see how she tried to do what Jesus had empowered her to do. She tried to teach the other disciples what she had learned and they hadn't learned. And some were able to receive it and some weren't. And, therein begins the process of women being, and, one of the things I see as my mission is to put women back into that story. More importantly, to put women back into their own role as leaders, priests and priestesses, teachers, guides, spiritual healers, and really acknowledging and validating the unique way that women are called to live out those vocations in the world.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Just what you were saying about the misinterpretation. And I actually just want to check in. Are you able to see me okay? Like, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's been a little glitchy.
A little glitchy.
But for the most part, I think we're okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm not sure. Sometimes my internet's a bit funny, but I can hear you okay, which is
Good.
the important thing. Okay.
Good.
I really appreciate what you're saying right now about the misinterpretation of Mary Magdalene and how that shaped the suppression of women in the church completely.
Yes.
And one reason why I am so honored to be my father's daughter and my grandfather's granddaughter is because when I was little, you know, I was hearing all these words about Baptists that I didn't really understand. And I heard the word fundamentalist a lot. And I remember asking my dad, you know, what that meant. And to make it understandable for me in that time, he's like, well, what it could matter, why it might want to matter to you, Shelley. I was very little, you know, maybe 4. And he said, you know, I really want you to be able to serve as a deacon or even be a preacher in a church one day, if that's what you want to do.
Wow.
And there are some people who don't want that to happen. There are some people who consider themselves very fundamentalist that do not feel like women have a voice in the church. And he said they do have a voice. He said women have a voice. Gay women have a voice. Everyone has a voice. And so that has always been really important to me. And that sparked an interest in me of why was there so much suppression? Why was that? And I mean, I, of course, have been poring over Gnostic texts and anything I could get my hands on, the Apocrypha, like all the book of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Like, why wasn't that included in the canonical scriptures, you know? And I'm sure there's different reasons for different things, but in the end, the story needs to be told. And women need to understand that, you know, Jesus wasn't this like shaming person of women and their sexuality. If anything, he was very embracing of it. And, you know, in certain gospels, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think you probably know a lot more about gospel than I do, but it's one of the texts, it may have been Philip, the Gospel of Philip, where it talks about, you know, him favoring her and saying that he loved her, then like loved her more than the other women. And it even talks about him, you know, them being companions.
Yes.
And possibly his wife. And that it talks about him kissing her on the mouth.
Yes.
And actually the word mouth isn't even legible, but we assume that it's, you know, it's not actually like a definitive translation, but that's what, you know, scholars over the years have determined, that he was affectionate. Jesus was affectionate with Mary Magdalene. She was with him everywhere he went. We know that she provided him money, a benefactor for him, and that there were many women that were, you know, equal in this ministry, and that they were actually making it possible. You know, they were supporting these other disciples. And, you know, Mary, as we know her now, is the apostle of apostles. And in many of the texts, I just was so excited to read that she was, I mean, to me, she's actually kind of the reason Christianity exists in some ways, because of her ministry and because she chose to share the message in her own way, even though she didn't get the spotlight. And that's okay. But now we're giving her that spotlight.
Yes. Yeah, it's, you know, it's so interesting. there's a million different theories on Mary Magdalene. And, like you, I've read, a million books, some of them scholarly, some fiction, some channeled, some, I'm not sure what genre they would fall into. And for me, I tend to lean towards the more scholarly approach. I don't know, it's because of my background in ministry, because I, came out of a lay ministry program and have 7 years of training in theology, scripture, spirituality, spiritual counseling. I lean towards that because I want to be able to say, well, here's this historical document that says this. Now, how do we interpret that? That's the question. That being said, I've kind of come to some of my own conclusions about what I think, I guess I'll say, is the truth beyond the words. And with that, not getting married to any of those theories. And at the same time, having no issue with other people's theories. I've read some materials that talk about Mary as an Essene priestess. I've read others that speak of her as a temple of Isis, a priestess in the temple of Isis. There's others that have different approaches to take on her. I just listened to an interview with Elizabeth Cunningham, where in her fictional books, she portrays Mary as a Celtic priestess. Now, these are all interesting ways of exploring and understanding the Magdalene. And what I've come to learn, or I guess understand, is that Mary presents herself to us in the way that we need her in our own lives. And she seems to present herself to us based on our own mythologies, our own temperament, our own personality, and ways that are unique to our own calling. So for me, it's been important that the Mary story be grounded in the Jesus story, because obviously she was a student initially. I believe that she did become a co-equal minister with Jesus. I would like to believe that they had an intimate partnership, that they were perhaps husband and wife. And that all makes sense to me because, as Jean-Yves Lelou says in his book, Sacred Embrace, if Jesus was to have the full experience of the human condition, he had to have had an expression of intimacy. He had to have been able to enjoy intimate love in his life. And it makes sense to me that it would be with Mary Magdalene that he had that intimate expression. And it really brings forth a whole different model of relationship. And I think, at least for me, that's another big part of the Mary Magdalene story, is this idea of beloved partnership. In Western culture, we've grown up with this "you complete me, happily ever after" kind of idea of love. And we're all waiting for the handsome prince or the rock star to come in, sweep us off our feet, and lead us into happily ever after. And ultimately, those stories are based in codependency. It's us looking for something outside of us to complete or fill an emptiness within ourselves. Beloved partnerships says it's not about finding someone to complete you. It's about becoming complete unto yourself first and finding another complete person to share a life and a vocation with. And Mary and Jesus represent that archetype. They bring forth that idea that relationship can be an intimate partnership that is not about codependency, but is about interdependency. Or as Abraham Maslow calls it, self-actualized love. Barbara Marx Hubbard calls it the conscious couple. And, I just really, for me, that's an important part of the Mary Magdalene story as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely is. Yes, because it would change everything, I think.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's been a lot of misinterpretation around Yeshua and his life too. And I'm not like a patriarchy basher,
Yeah.
and like the patriarchy, I feel, elevated Jesus to this level. I mean,
Hmm.
and then they did a lot of things like in the name of Jesus that were murderous and
Yes.
very vile. And so
Yes.
that like diminished this understanding of the true love. And even the Gnostics, like I've had many conversations with my father, and he says it's a shame that these two dogmas couldn't exist together. Or
And I don't see any reason why they can't.
that's just it.
Yeah.
He did mention one thing though. He said, the one thing is that, um, the Gnostics' belief in the quote unquote like demiurge,
Right.
this like creator of the created world. It's not the creator.
Right.
It could be even considered like Satan, so to speak.
Right.
It's the thing that made the stuff, like the thing that
Right.
things of the flesh. And so that, the Gnostics say that Jesus maybe couldn't have been fully human because he was so divine. But then I feel like that takes away a little bit of the whole point that he was human.
Right.
And that's the beauty of it. That's why we can relate. That's why
Right.
God sent his only son, right? So that we could get
Hmm.
it. Like, get that homie is human. He's in touch with
Right.
this divinity that he understands that he is created from. He understands we are in this world. We're here, but we're not of it.
Hmm.
And that's what I think the whole thing is.
Yes.
This whole concept of him being intimate and him having a full experience of a human life is really important. And I really appreciate that interpretation. And, that, and so if we were to look at Jesus having a relationship with Mary Magdalene, it may have gone very differently. And maybe it wouldn't have been so patriarchal.
Right. Right. And I understand how it happened. It doesn't make it right.
Right.
It's Jesus came into the world at a time that was incredibly patriarchal, very hierarchical. It was dictatorial. He came into a Roman and Greek culture that was already dualistic. And, very early in, I guess I'm going to say, the unfolding of what happened after Jesus, very early, the followers, and I hate to say this, but the male followers sold out to the culture. The culture, it was too much of an uphill climb, I think, for them to hang on tight to this idea of egalitarianism and mutual love and respect and the rights of women in a world that was everything but that. And, then the emperor, Constantine, gets a hold of Christianity and says, hey, I found a new God. Yeah. Let's get rid of Apollo. Let's put Jesus in his place. He's going to be the new sun god. Let's create ritual and pageantry and all of these things that were already happening in Roman culture. And let's make this Christian.
Right.
And yeah, so, and as I'm saying that, I'm seeing this image of Mary, being in this hotbed of what's happening in the Jerusalem area as, the Jesus message is trying to find its place. And I see her, I don't want to say sneaking away. I see her understanding what's happening and making a choice to go a different direction. And so that's where we come into some of the legends about Mary. My intuition and some of the resources that I resonate with tell me that she found refuge in Alexandria, Egypt first. And, that makes sense in that's where the whole Nag Hammadi books collections came from. And specifically the Gospel of Mary Magdalene came out of Egypt. And then we have all of these legends about Mary in France, southern France, and there's some legends even about her being in Avalon or Glastonbury, England. And it's like not only was there an intellectual split, there was a physical split. And the mind and the male went one direction, the heart and the feminine went the other direction. And it's interesting to see how this feminine inner Gnostic, which ultimately means inner knowing, that quest for knowledge of the divine within ourselves, that these two paths developed independent of each other, but we also see where they've intersected. So this is where I'm really grateful for my Roman Catholic upbringing and specifically my ministry training, because I had an opportunity to be exposed to and learn the deep sacred tradition of Christian contemplative practices. And that's the inner esoteric feminine aspect of Christianity, if you will. And, you know, we see it in the work of St. Francis of Assisi and Clare of Assisi. We see it in Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich and Catherine of Siena. We see it in Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. We see it in, I know I'm missing somebody, St. Ignatius of Loyola. You know, there's this deep tradition of this inner, personal, intimate relationship with the divine that is not about somebody else telling us what to believe, but coming to know the divine within ourselves. And I'll tell you, you know, after going to Catholic school for almost 12 years, going into ministry training in my late 20s and coming upon these resources, I was mad. I was like, wait a minute, this is what I've been looking for my whole entire life. And I went to Catholic school for 12 years and not once did anyone teach me imagination contemplation. Not once was I taught centering prayer. Not once was I taught Lectio Divina, how to have a conversation with the divine. I was never supported in automatic writing. You know, it's, I was mad. And I'm like, I can't be the only person that was raised in a Christian tradition that is longing for that intimate relationship, but hasn't been given the resources to connect with that piece. So that was really my launching point, was connecting with those resources and coming to understand that inner experience of the divine. And it's really been my passion to bring that forward. And I know the Magdalene supported me connecting with that piece, but also the way that unfolded in my own life and what it became, because it was from that place that my whole entire curriculum sprang out of. So the authentic freedom protocol that you mentioned, which is one of the 5 classes that's in my Magdalene priestess training. And, you know, it just unfolded from there into all of these different resources that supported me in my own journey of self-actualization and coming to know myself, what my gifts are, how I'm called to share these in the world. And then I was able, through divine intervention, help support Mary whispering in my ear, put it into a practical form that people can actually use. And it's so different than what most people have grown up with if they grew up in any sort of institutional setting, institutional religious setting, because it's not about doctrine. It's not about dogma. It's not about me telling you what to believe. It's about me giving you resources to help you find out what you believe yourself, finding your own truth. And I ultimately believe that that's what Jesus did. I believe that that's what Mary Magdalene did. And that's at least what I feel deeply called to support other people in doing.
Absolutely. Yes. The kingdom of heaven is within, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's not some fantasy out here. It's not like when you die, you go there. It's not, I mean,
Right.
Maybe that does happen, but according to our, friend and brother, Yeshua, he says it's inside the whole time.
Right. Right.
Why is everybody looking everywhere else?
Yes.
Really interesting. And I really love what you're up to with your Magdalene priestess training. Priestess is a bit of a hot word right now.
Yep.
And, I'm careful about using it. And I know that a lot of women are curious, out there, what exactly is a Magdalene priestess, and what does it look like to restore this Magdalene priestesshood in this world right now? What are we up to? Because I feel I am that.
Yeah.
I really feel I am. And
Yep.
sometimes people say, oh, you can't call yourself a priestess. Like, you have to go through this, and this. And so I just want to, hear like your opinion about that, like just priestess in general and what it looks like for this Magdalene priesthood to be like on the rise, because I definitely feel it.
Yeah, thank you. As you're asking the question, it's bringing me back to my days, the 10 years that I worked in the Catholic Church. And the time that I was there as a lay minister was really, it was what's the word I'm looking for? It was a volatile time to be working in the church, because it was the pre-sex abuse scandal was just exploding. The priest shortage was getting to the point of being desperate, and people were leaving the church, in droves. And so I'm working in the church while all of this is imploding, exploding, whatever you want to call it, and also working in the church when Joseph Ratzinger was elected Pope, and basically began his reform of the reform, as he called it, basically taking away a lot of the, I'm going to say, freedoms, empowerments that were put in place through Vatican II, and just stripping those away from the church and really making it, in my opinion, my own experience, a less welcoming, less hospitable place. And as I was doing my ministry and watching all of these things fall apart, specifically the priest shortage, there's a crisis in vocations. We don't have any men coming forward for the priesthood. And I would get so frustrated when I would hear people say that, because in the community that I was working in, there were 1,500 vocations. There were women and men and children of all places in society doing all kinds of work that were authentically called to serve love, to serve the purpose of love. And I felt like I was, I say this often, a voice crying out in the wilderness, talking only to sand, shaking my fist saying, what do you mean there's a shortage in vocations? They're all right here. You just won't open your eyes to see that all these people are crying out. They're longing for formation. They're longing for meaning and purpose in their lives, and they're longing to give back. And if you would just wake up, institutional church, and see that here's all these people that want to serve the cause of love, there's your vocations. So I share that because it really informs the way I understand the Magdalene priestess or priesthood. And I almost prefer the word priesthood, even though, we typically think of that as gender specific. And I'd like to get away from gender specificity because the word priestess has some baggage around it. Like you said, it's a hot word right now. And so what I tell women and men that are discerning the Magdalene priestess training, is that the purpose of the training is to support you in your self-actualization and to empower you within a community of supportive men and women to live out that vocation to the fullness of your ability. What that means is whatever it needs to mean for you. So will some be called to formal worship settings? Yeah, marriages, baptisms, other rites of passage, you bet.
See, Lauri, I'm not sure if you can actually hear
To
me.
the I can hear you. Oh, I can hear you now. You're kind of fading in and out.
I know. Let's see. The last thing I heard you say, and I'll edit all this, of course.
Okay.
But you said some people may feel called to the actual worship.
Okay.
Okay.
You want me to start there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
So with the Magdalene priestess, what I'm seeing is that people are coming in with their own gifts, their own skill set, their own talent. They're discerning that more fully, but the priestess training is really supporting them in living out those gifts to their fullness of their ability. And that can mean anything. You know, we have women that are accountants, social workers, retired people, mothers, stay-at-home mothers, grandmothers, massage therapists, nutritional counselors, people that are discerning their second career, authors and writers, energy workers, dance instructors, dancers. You know, it's really across the board as to how people are finding ways to use these resources. And so when I think of the Magdalene priesthood or a Magdalene priestess, I think of it in the context of what is your unique call? What are your unique gifts? And how can we help support you, empower you in using these gifts, number one, for your own fulfillment, but then in service to the betterment of the world? And you can do anything with that. You can be a lawyer, a doctor, a minister, you know, a lifeguard. You know, it doesn't matter how you use it, because it's really about your own inner process of being free enough to be who you were made to be.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's very true. And I think it's important too to have a teacher and go
Yes.
through trainings and to understand how to like wield this feminine Christ that's
Yes.
rising. And so I love that you have a platform to help women and men, and I love that men can do this. It's not gender specific. Like my beloved, he totally resonates with the Magdalene, and he's like,
Yeah.
I'm a Magdalene priest. I'm like, I know, I feel you. And so, you know, those resources are really empowering, and it's also very good, I think, for those of us who may have like shied away, you know, from the Bible, to read these other texts, these
Yes.
Gnostic Gospels, these Nag Hammadi, you know, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Apocrypha, which is the Bible that they didn't include in the Bible.
Right.
It's really important, I think, or it could even, I mean, it doesn't even have to be those. I mean, even if it's the Rig Veda, or,
Right.
you know, actually, this is a bit random, but I had this one woman, she's a massage client of mine, and she's Mormon. And she was saying that the reason why Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary and other Marys were left out is so that their names would not ever become blasphemed in the same way that Jesus Christ's name has become blasphemed, like degraded,
Wow.
made less. And she said that, you know, according to their belief, well, the Mormons do believe that Mary and Jesus were married. Like, they don't talk about it very much.
Right.
I do think it's true.
Right.
And, you know,
Yeah.
and so she was saying that, you know, the reason why the name was kind of taken out and not really advertised as the Christ consciousness is to preserve it. And
Yes.
I thought that was a really interesting perspective. Yeah. And so, you know, I know that there's a lot of people out there watching who, you know, maybe turned off by the word church or not really understand even what that means. And so, you know, I really appreciate you clarifying this concept around being a Magdalene priestess and Magdalene priesthood. And so, you know, this title of our topic today is like this emergent church. And so I'm
Mhm.
curious if you can talk about this emergent church and how it has nothing to do with what we have known previously as the word church. And so I'm very curious about that.
Okay, so I'm getting ready to blaspheme all over the place.
Okay, great. Let me just make sure our internet connection is good here. I don't know what's going on with it. Okay, continue on.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Um, yeah, emergent church. That is such an interesting topic. And it's been something that's been in my heart for a really long time, even when I was in the institutional church, both as a minister and as a congregant. And and there's a lot of, specifically in the Protestant communities, there's a lot of writings being done on the topic of emergent church. You know, Phyllis Tickle, I think, is the number one author on that topic, and really talking about what's happening with institutional religion in the West and how it's dying. And, you know, we see congregations getting smaller and smaller and smaller in mainline Protestant churches and Catholic Church. And, you know, the places where it's growing is more in the evangelical or Pentecostal realm. And so for traditional institutional religions, what does that mean? And you know, for me, it's meant a lot of different things over the course of the last 20 years. But today, I have to bring it all the way back to Jesus. And, you know, what I'm going to say is a fact. Jesus did not set out to start a new church. He was Jewish. He was a devout Jew. And he was trying to support the people of the Jewish faith to see the love and the compassion and the oneness that has always been part of Judaism. But at the time that Jesus was living, you know, the temple was being ruled by dualistic Pharisees and, you know, other priests that really were more about fear, power, and control than they were about bringing forth a message of love. And so Jesus was there to try to reform his own church. He wasn't there to start something new. And so if we go back to that piece, then what does church mean? And for me, it's going to have to be something so different than what we've known. And I used to think it had to do with structure, like a building. And I don't think that that's true anymore. You know, I look at the global world that we're becoming. I mean, the fact that you and I can have a conversation, how many hundreds, thousands of miles away. I had a conversation this morning with a young woman that's in South Africa that's discerning the Magdalene priestess training. I have women in the program that are in New Zealand and Australia and Ireland, England. You know, it's India. It's a global phenomenon at this point. And so what does church mean when we're living in a global economy, when we're living in a global culture, a global world? And so with that, there's not a temple. Ritual becomes more individual or conducted in the context of a small local community. So I have, you know, a small community here that meets in my home. You know, we just finished, what did we do this week? Tuesday morning, we did a ritual on abundance and prosperity. Monday, we're celebrating the Feast of the Magdalene. We're doing an equinox celebration. When the equinox hits, and becomes more like a small community or a small house church is the language some people use. I see church as becoming, well, I believe that we are evolving into that means is leaving dualism, moving away from separation or perceived separation. And I believe that that was Jesus's message, is it's not about separation, it's about oneness, and we're here to be one. And I believe that we're evolving into that. And so from that perspective, church takes on a whole different meaning, because if we're one, then Lauri Lumby can sit next to Barack Obama, and well, he's Christian, so that doesn't count. I can sit next to a Muslim and a Jew and a Hindu and a Buddhist in the same room, and we can share ritual, teachings, knowledge, wisdom, oneness. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's the emerging church is what's already happening right in front of us. You know, we see people not gravitating towards institutional settings. We see them reaching out to a global community. We see people seeking out wisdom literature and wisdom teachers across belief systems. We see people embracing the truth that's present within all traditions and finding ways to live out that truth without having to put a cross around their neck or don some other sort of costume that says, well, this is what I believe and I'm right and you're wrong. What are we all looking for? We're all looking for love, peace, joy, harmony, and how can we work together to make that happen? And I ultimately believe that the only place that that can happen is within ourselves first. We have to find that place of oneness within ourselves. And then when we're in that place of oneness, then what we formerly perceived as separation doesn't exist anymore. And we're able to love each other simply because we're human beings, not because we have a label or a nationality or a religion or whatever.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
That's the one commandment that, you know, Yeshua gave, was like, love God and love your brother as yourself.
Yeah.
So all of the interesting separation done in the name of Christianity left like a disgusting taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
So I left Christianity, and I don't call myself a Christian. I call myself a disciple. Because Christianity,
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, you know, I give a lot of thanks for my father and my grandfather, because I did learn that from them. And even though they were ministers in this church, they said it's not about, you know, I mean, our ministry is our discipleship. And that's the really important thing to remember, is just to be that agent of love. And if you're not being that agent of love, you know, what's the point of people calling themselves Christians and then using it to justify acts of hatred?
Yep.
That's like the ultimate blasphemy, really, is like attributing acts of God to the devil and acts of the devil to God.
Yes. And
so what they're doing, you know, and bless them, right? Like, bless the enemies, bless all of them. I mean, I don't consider them my enemy. I see it, then they're enemies with themselves.
Yes. Yes.
And so I just got over it quick, you know. And I could see through it, you know, from very, very
right.
And you mentioned something about wisdom. And I think it was Solomon in the Bible that asked for more wisdom.
Yes. Yeah.
Where Proverbs came from.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so another amazing text on wisdom that is not very well known is the Pistis Sophia.
Yes.
And that, I mean, I've barely been able to really get into it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I am understanding about it is this is another sacred text that actually talks about Sophia like being this divine feminine wisdom, which was like Christ's message.
Right.
So I'm just
Right.
curious if you could just touch on that for a moment.
Yeah, well, it's been a long time since I've read the Piece of Sophia and any related commentaries. But as you're unpacking that piece, one of the things that it brings me to is the idea of wisdom and logos,
Mm-hmm.
and logos being the word, and Sophia being wisdom, and that we need the word and the wisdom in order to have a balanced human experience. And in I guess I'll say in many interpretations of the Magdalene story, Mary is presented as the embodiment of wisdom, as the embodiment of Sophia. And I think it's specifically in the Piece of Sophia where they talk about Mary Magdalene as being that embodiment, and then Jesus being the logos, Jesus representing the word. And when you look at, and I can't remember where, I think it's either in the Book of Wisdom or the Book of Proverbs where Sophia, or Chokhmah, which is the Hebrew name for the feminine divine aspect that is thought about as wisdom, that Chokhmah, or Sophia, was the co-creatrix with the word. And so there's this masculine Yahweh, Yod He Vav He, and this feminine Chokhmah, or Asherah, or Sophia, whatever name you want to give that feminine aspect, and that they were co-creators of the world. And I just think that that's such a beautiful image. And it really is more, more reflective of the human experience, for sure. I mean, you can't bring new life into the world by yourself. And even test tube babies aren't made by themselves. The ovum, the egg and the sperm have to come together in order to bring forth that life. And so how we came up with this idea of the male-only, usually white, God, that was the only creator of the world, it doesn't even make sense from a biological perspective. And so I love the wisdom literature that allows us to reconnect with those feminine understandings of the divine. And, one of the things that I want to add to that is, and this is, I'm not Jewish, so I'm probably, this is one of those things I know just enough to get myself in trouble. But there are all these amazing names of the divine in Hebrew scripture that are feminine. And so again, where did we come up with this idea of the old man in the sky God? Because it's not even Jewish. It's not a Jewish idea. So, yeah, we have a lot of healing to do.
We do. And it's interesting because, that's where the patriarchy comes in. And
Yeah.
I think that is what elevated it to this white dude in the sky.
Yeah.
Which is and unfortunately, that led to major distortion on
Yes.
the planet. I think especially around sexuality.
Yes.
One of the themes of the summit is like remembering and reclaiming sexual sovereignty, and like the aspect of sovereignty that I really love and appreciate. It's like you're in your supreme power, but it's not affected by anything outside of yourself.
Right.
And unfortunately, like, because this distorted view of God and this distorted view of Christianity became like the kind of whitewashed religion of what's supposed to be normal. And it absolutely isn't. Like you said, I mean, if anything is, one thing I like about, like as above, so below, right? I mean, so if it is that way, and we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, and we have like the feminine and the masculine make life, and it's a co-creation, then it must be that way above.
Right.
So, or, in the larger scale. I don't even like really saying above and below, because it takes it away from you, really.
Right.
And so it's just really interesting. So whenever I left the traditional element of church, I remember thinking, this whole Father, Son, Holy Ghost thing, I'm having a hard time relating to that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I created my own Trinity that worked for me,
Yep.
which was Divine Mother, Divine Father, Holy Child. Like
I
acknowledging that
love that.
I am the completion of the Trinity. I am the
Yes.
Holy Child. Jesus was the Holy Child.
Yes.
And then he became the Holy Father, and Magdalene was the Holy Mother, and then they possibly birthed holy children. It's still technically legend,
Right. But we're their children.
We are their children. That's just
We are their children.
We
Yeah.
are their children, regardless of if there was a physical birth. And
right.
That leads into a lot of mythology around Mary Magdalene, being the Holy Grail. But then this is where we get into those lines across the scholarly and the mythological realms. And so we'll leave it like mostly scholarly for today. But I just want to thank you, so much for being here and bringing light to this. And it's so interesting. This is like only one of the few interviews where there was like a little bit of technical difficulty. And I think that's just because this message is so profound.
Yes.
There are many forces at work that don't want this information to be widespread, because it will and it is disrupting the patriarchy. It's like, how do you, the way that God's given me this vision is, if the patriarchy is like, let's just say like a whole big city, like the Magdalene is like the roots of the earth, just like coming up and just like rocking the foundation until it crumbles. And it's a slow death,
Yes.
Eventually that motherly earth energy kind of like takes over these false constructs.
Yes.
It created a ton of wounding, for so many people. And so like the very thing that is meant to be like a healing balm to our society, which is like religion is meant to be a connection to God.
Right.
It hasn't been that way. And
no.
It's actually been quite the opposite, taking people away from their connection to God and just turning it into a means of like monetary and political control. So, I am very like welcoming of this new energy. I feel like I am a priestess of this energy, even if I don't necessarily have to like announce that.
Right.
But I'm not ashamed of it either.
Right.
And I feel like my whole life I've been in training for this. And you too.
You have a
similar background. Yours is Catholic, mine is Baptist. And I just, the way I came across you was through this Magdalene priestess training that you have.
Okay.
And so I'm really grateful that you have that. And I've really been enjoying your blogs and enjoying your resources. And so I know that you want to offer the audience an opportunity to also, sample this Magdalene priestess training that you have. And so we'll include a link for that. So if you just want to tell us a little bit about that gift, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, it's so it's a free preview course to the Magdalene priestess training. And what it is it's an online program, and you have an opportunity through this gift to experience sample lessons from each of the 5 courses that are part of the Magdalene priestess training. And so you get a sense of kind of the foundational pieces of the program, and what that process will look like if you feel called to explore and say yes to that. So, yeah.
Great. And we can access that just by going to your website. Is that
correct?
Okay.
Yep.
Yay. Well, that's great. And
yay.
I'm really looking forward to reading your book. I have a whole bookshelf over here of like a ton of Magdalene books, so I'm ready to add yours to it. And I know that you have a little bit of a promotion going right now. And so thank you for extending that to our audience. If you just want to briefly just mention.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Like the book and the deal you have going with it, I'd love to extend that out to them so they know what they have access to.
Yeah, so the book is Song of the Beloved, The Gospel According to Mary Magdalene. It's a fictional account, but as one of my teachers has said many times, every story is true. Some of them actually happened. So I leave it up to the reader to determine what resonates as truth for them and what does not. And so the promotion is that the Kindle version is basically half off right now.
Right.
So it's normally $9.99 and it's $4.99 through the month of August.
Good.
So yeah, so it gives you a great opportunity to, you know, get the book on Kindle and pay half price. And the hard copy version, it's paperback. I think it's, well, Amazon discounts everything. The list price is $18.95, so I don't know what Amazon is selling it for.
Amazon buys everything. I think the whole world is about to be owned by Amazon. I don't know, but
yeah, pretty much.
well, thank you for those gifts. And I just really want to encourage the audience out there watching to please take advantage of this, because I just have to say that my very deep religious wounding was, I would even say I had like a dis-ease around religion that was cured by my study and embrace of the Magdalene and Mother Mary and Martha and all of these women that surrounded Jesus, but specifically the Magdalene. She is a very powerful healer, and
yes.
she is a very powerful medicine woman. And her energy is very present. I feel that we are in the resurrection of the feminine Christ, and that this is some sort of second coming, but it's not the way that people thought it would be. And this is understanding Jesus and understanding Christ in a whole new light, and putting away those patriarchal perspectives, because that's just not the truth. And so the truth is in these feminine teachings, and it helps you to understand that it's not just some white man God in the sky, but that the kingdom of heaven really is within you as a woman, you know. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing this stuff, Lauri. Like, it's really necessary and it's just inspiring. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Shelley. I really appreciate this. I'm so excited to hear the other interviews and what other women are offering through this process. And I'm grateful for you for being a channel for this, and, you know, for bringing the Magdalene message out into the world. And it's just, it is the second coming. And I absolutely agree with you on that. And the Magdalene is being born through us and through, I'm going to say, millions of us. And we are being called to be her voice, and to be the voice of egalitarianism and love, harmony, peace, support, contentment. And yeah, this absolutely is a second coming. That's how I understand it as well.
Wonderful. Well, I just, from Magdalene Priestess to Magdalene Priestess, I deeply honor you. I deeply honor your work. And yes, thank you again. And for everybody out there watching, make a conversation about it on the Facebook page, please. Like, you can bring it all there. Bring it all. You know, we want to hear everything this brings up for you, even if it's not pretty, because as one of my teachers said to me, the path of the priestess isn't pretty. And that's okay.
No.
So you can bring your mess, you know, it's okay. And I know that there's a lot of mess around all this stuff. And me and Lauri here, we're here to clean it up. So bring your mess.
Yes.
We'll talk about it. Okay, Lauri, and okay, all you beautiful wild ones, all the Magdalenes and Mother Marys out there, all of you bringing through these archetypes, we honor you, we see you, we thank you, and we will see you for the next interview. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.